I'm Mark Golub, and in the news remains the public discussion on the Iran nuclear deal, and for us here at JBS, of course, how members of the Jewish community are responding to the entire issue. On Tuesday afternoon, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had a conference call with American Jewry organized by the Jewish Federations of North America. And many of you had a chance to see our coverage of that conference here on JBS. If you missed it, we'll be replaying it for you Saturday at 6 p.m. and Sunday at 1 p.m. Many people noted the significance of a foreign head of state encouraging American citizens to contact their legislators in Congress and urge them to block an administration-sponsored initiative, which simply indicates the degree to which the Iran nuclear threat is of paramount and overriding concern to the State of Israel and to a significant portion of the American Jewish community. By the way, it should also be noted very strongly that in the latest American polls, some 70% of the American people now have serious reservations about the Iran nuclear deal. This may be of critical importance to the State of Israel, but the prospect of Iran's becoming a nuclear weapons state is no less a threat to the safety and security of the American people. And it's absolutely legitimate for every American, Jew and non-Jew, to register their opposition to this Iran nuclear deal and to lobby for the deal's rejection in Congress, including an override of a presidential veto. But inside the Jewish community, there's a kind of self-conscious, almost apologetic posture being taken by many American Jews who seem to fear, and I use the word fear on purpose, who seem to fear that it will appear as if only Jews who care about Israel are pushing legislators to block the accords, as if American Jewry is motivated not out of a sense of what's in America's best national interests, but only out of a concern for the well-being of Israel. So that Jews fear they may be subject to the insidious charge of dual loyalty, or worse, of being more loyal to Israel than they are to the United States. And some have suggested that for his own political purposes, President Obama has made it seem as if only American Jews oppose this deal. And the administration has gone out of its way to send Secretary of State John Kerry to meet with a number of national Jewish organizations. And yesterday, Tuesday at 4 p.m., on the same day that Mr. Netanyahu had a conference call with Jewish leaders on the Iran nuclear deal, the president hosted a meeting of more than 20 national Jewish leaders at the White House to discuss with them the Iran nuclear deal. The Jews invited to the White House included leaders of AIPAC, which has taken a very hard line against the deal and is encouraging American Jews to lobby Congress. Leaders of the President's Conference, including Malcolm Hoenlein. Jeremy Ben-Ami of J Street was there with Alexandra Stanton of J Street. There were leaders of the Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox religious organizations from ADL, from the AJC. Jerry Silverman of the Jewish Federations of North America was there. John Ruskay and Robert Wexler were there. Alan Solo was there, as was Susan Turnbull of the JCPA. So it was quite a cross-section of American Jewry, though obviously no one from the Jewish right was there. No one from ZOA or Americans for a Safe Israel. Ken Bialkin of the American Israel Friendship League was not there. Alan Dershowitz, a liberal Jew, but one who's been very critical of the deal and of the president, he was not invited. But much of mainstream American Jewry was there. And it's very interesting to note that the morning after that White House meeting, the AJC, the American Jewish Committee, which has insisted on taking its time in formulating its position on the deal, has taken a very responsible approach, not coming out right away, one way or the other. Well, the AJC on Wednesday morning published its position now on the Iran nuclear deal, the gist of which reads, in the end, AJC's leadership concluded overwhelmingly that we must oppose this deal. There are too many risks, concerns, and ambiguities for us to lend our support. Now, it's no small matter for the American Jewish Committee to come out so forcefully against the Iran nuclear accords. And to further explain the AJ's position, I'm once again most pleased to have on our JBS phones the Executive Director of the American Jewish Committee, David Harris. David, thank you for joining us once again.
It's always a pleasure, Mark. Thank you.
David, you heard my intro. Have I described the AJC process correctly? I've said that you took your time. Last time you and I spoke on JBS, you were saying you were still in the process of really analyzing it. You took your time, and then today the AJC came out with a very strong statement. Is that a fair way of describing the process internally?
Absolutely, it is, Mark. As you mentioned, I had the privilege of being on your show a couple of weeks ago, just after the deal was announced in Vienna. And you asked me at the time what our position was, and I said to you that we were going to take our time because the deal required it. This is a very, very complex deal. It's dense with language. It's an extremely consequential deal, and it deserves far more than I love it, I hate it as a first response.
Yes.
And so we took the last 3 weeks, exactly 22 days, and we met with a range of people, Mark. John Kerry, the Secretary of State, was gracious enough to come to New York and to visit AJC and to spend 90 minutes in private conversation with our leadership. Separately, he called me and spent 25 minutes on the phone alone with me. Wendy Sherman, the Undersecretary of State, who led the negotiations the last couple of years, also came up from Washington to meet privately with the AJC leadership. And the list goes on, both of those in support and those in opposition and those in between. So we took our time, we listened carefully, we listened respectfully, and the statement we issued today, which is on our website at ajc.org, and has now also been published on the Huffington Post and the Times of Israel websites, reflects our thinking process over the last 3 weeks and our conclusions.
David, what do you think tipped the scale for you? I knew that John Kerry had met with you. I didn't know he'd placed a personal call to you. And I am interested in your telling us what were the points he was trying to make? He obviously had a message for you. So I do want you to get to that, but I first want to ask you, what tipped the scales for you after you took all your time, you heard both sides, and many American Jews have not heard both sides in a cogent, articulate way. What tipped the scales for you?
It's hard to say, Mark, that there was one moment or one fact, but I think at the end of the day, and when you read from our statement the word overwhelmingly, it's an accurate description, Mark, of what our lay and staff leadership included. Overwhelmingly, people decided at the end of the day that yes, this was negotiated in good faith by serious people. People like John Kerry have been friends of the Jewish community for decades. So we honor their service to the country, but at the end of the day, this deal essentially legitimized the Iranian regime. It created a pathway, not tomorrow, but down the road, for Iran to become a nuclear threshold state, and it provided them with tens of billions of dollars in sanctions relief, in the unfreezing of assets, without any insistence on behavioral change. So a country that even as it signs a deal, Mark, continues to call for death to America and calls for death to Israel and continues to destabilize, requiring us, the United States, to have to now promise billions of new dollars in arms sales to the Arab countries in the region, and trying to offer new arms to Israel, which doesn't want to discuss it at the moment, suggests that we're entering into a new phase of instability, despite the celebration by some of the deal. And that's a very frightening prospect because, again, it legitimizes a regime in Iran whose worldview is antithetical to the worldview of the United States and our partners.
All right, David, there was a representative of the AJC at the White House yesterday. I'm assuming that the president tried to persuade Jewish leaders that they should back off and that they should let this deal go through with as little lobbying Congress against it as possible. You have had contacts with the administration for years and years and years. Tell us, what did John Kerry, what was his main argument? What is Barack Obama's main argument? And when you seem to see it so clearly, overwhelmingly you say, the AJC leadership has endorsed your statement. If the AJC sees it so clearly, can you explain to us what you feel is motivating a John Kerry or a Barack Obama to tell you, David, you're wrong? What are they saying?
First of all, I need to say that I was invited to the White House meeting yesterday, but it so happens that yesterday, August the 4th, was my mother's 92nd birthday.
Oh, Mazel Tov.
By the way, she shares the same birth date with Barack Obama. But so we had a long planned family event with our children flying in, and it conflicted with the White House, and so we asked permission to send my colleague Jason Isaacson, who attended the meeting. And by the way, it was a 2-hour meeting. It was a very apparently very open and frank meeting. Vice President Biden was there the entire time, National Security Advisor Susan Rice. So it was a very important discussion. Look, the administration makes some important points, Mark, which can't be easily dismissed. And I say this as someone whose organization has come out against the deal. But they say, look, number one, there are practical issues here. The United States was not negotiating alone with Iran. We had Britain, France, Germany, the High Representative of the European Union, the Russians, and the Chinese. So the agreement we forged among all of us may not be perfect, but it does reflect the major powers in the world and should be taken seriously. And number two, they argue that this will block the pathways for Iran to get to the bomb for at least the next 10 to 15 years. And what's the alternative? The alternative, they would say, is to continue the status quo ante before the deal, and that simply means Iran builds more centrifuges and more low enriched uranium, and that clearly is a pathway to a bomb. So they asked the question, what's the alternative? And no one, they say, has come up with a better alternative than the deal we signed in Vienna. So they make a strong case, and I believe that they fully believe their case, that this was the best they could get under difficult circumstances, but for the foreseeable future, it prevents Iran from getting the bomb, and that's priority number one.
Okay, and David, why was that not persuasive to the AJC?
Because the earlier administration approach, if you go back and look at the same administration, Mark, the same Obama administration, which has now been in office for more than 6.5 years, and look at their earlier statements. Their earlier statements, we think, were far more accurate. Namely, we want to take an approach that dismantles Iran's nuclear infrastructure in return for dismantling the sanctions regime. Well, the New Deal, unfortunately, does not dismantle the infrastructure. It unplugs it, it mothballs it, it sidelines it, but it doesn't destroy it. So what it does is it delays the day when Iran may become a threshold nuclear state, but at the same time, in a way, it almost validates it. And secondly, in doing so, we're unfreezing Iranian assets, which, depending on who you ask, range from $50 to $150 billion. Plus, we're going to be lifting the sanctions within a matter of 6 to 12 months, and you already see this stampede of businessmen eager to get to Iran, wanting to be first in the door, wanting to get contracts lined up. So the total cash bonanza to Iran, Mark, is likely to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars. The administration says. Our intelligence estimates suggest that money will be spent for delayed domestic purposes, roads, schools, sewers, hospitals, you name it. But for argument's sake, even if they're right, and I don't know that they're right, and even if Iran takes, say, 10% and devotes it to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to the Houthis in Yemen, to Assad in Syria, we are actually fueling our enemy's ability to further destabilize the country.
Yes.
And finally, Mark, look at the irony. The argument is made that the world will be safer, but at the same time, we, the United States, are in constant discussion with Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE, and the other Arab countries in the region, offering them more weapon systems, conventional weapon systems, to placate their concerns about Iran. So we're creating a new conventional arms race in the region, and Lord knows in the Middle East, it's the last thing anyone needs.
I want to push you one more moment, David. I don't feel you answered the administration's main point. Their main point was you could be right about every single thing you've said, and I believe you are. I think they know you are. The problem is their argument says there was no alternative. That's what they said to you at that White House meeting. Again, you couldn't be there because of your mother's birthday, but AJC was there. It's what Kerry said to you when he came up to New York. It's what you've heard over and over again. You may be right, so we did a bad job. Maybe there's even people in the administration who now acknowledge they did a bad job. They certainly, as you point out, had a very different starting point than where they ended up. But their argument is, and this is what I hear from people all the time. I don't hear anybody, David, tell me it's a good deal. What I hear people tell me is, it's the deal we've got, and no deal now would be worse than this deal. And I want to know how you answer that. That's their main point.
And I take the point very seriously, and we acknowledge the point in our own AJC statement, Mark. But again, you're dealing with a certainty versus an uncertainty. You're dealing with a certainty not just that you have a deal. Yes, you have a deal. But you have a deal which the President of the United States, in an interview, if I recall, with National Public Radio, acknowledged within up to 13 years would give Iran almost zero breakout time to the bomb.
Yes.
That's the deal you have. The deal you have is going to, and Mark, if you read the actual agreement, I think up to 60% of the agreement talks about sanctions relief, including specific names of individuals and organizations in Iran who will no longer be subject to sanctions. Those things are demonstrable facts. You will have tens of billions of dollars going to an Iranian regime which is the principal state sponsor of terrorism. That's the certainty that comes with a deal which we're told has only one headline: we stopped the Iranian bomb. There is an uncertainty in opposing the deal. I'm the first to acknowledge it. But the uncertainty of opposing it, to me, outweighs the certainty of supporting it, knowing where we're headed. Final point, Mark. I believe that the power of the United States should never be underestimated. The United States remains the world's colossal superpower. Lots of talk about American decline and retreat and all the rest, but look at facts and figures. We are the global superpower, meaning if the United States says we will not accept this deal, we are prepared to return to the negotiating table, and in the meantime, dear friends in Europe and elsewhere, you have to choose. You want to do business in Iran? Go ahead. But you're going to pay a price here. You're not going to be able to do both. The people of the United States have spoken. You cited in your introduction, Mark, polling data. The polling data in America is quite striking. It's now Pew, it's Quinnipiac, it's other polls that show a significant number of Americans not American Jews, Americans, including Jews, of course, who now have serious doubts or outright oppose this deal.
Yes.
You will have a majority of members of Congress in both houses. It may not be two-thirds at the moment, but you have a majority in both houses, including Democrats, who oppose the deal. The American people are speaking. The President of the United States has every right to go back and say, the American people have spoken. We're prepared to reopen negotiations. The Iranians will bluff and bluster and all the rest, but at the end of the day, Mark, they need a deal. They need sanctions relief.
Absolutely.
They need reintegration into the world economy. We have the power to accelerate it or to deny it.
Yes.
So it comes down to American global leadership.
I think you say it perfectly, David, and I'm so glad I pushed you to say it that way. Incidentally, you may know, you may not know the answer to this specific question. I'll tell you what I'm being told. Tell me if you have any sense of it. I am told that of the $150 billion that people are saying will be relief for Iran, that basically there is $150 billion that is being kept from Iran. Most of it, if not all of it, is being controlled by the United States. So that even if nobody joined a coalition, if the deal were voted down in Congress, if America said to Iran, we're not releasing any of that $150 billion, there would be a serious problem. There would be serious pressure on Iran to come back, as you say, to the negotiation tables, and we do the deal. We continue to work on the deal. But I'm asking you whether you know, and maybe you don't. Do you know how much of the $150 billion is in fact controlled by the United States?
Mark, there are two questions that your viewers need to understand. Question number one is the amount of money in frozen assets is variously estimated at between roughly $55 billion and $150 billion. So you'll hear different numbers.
Right.
And I cannot tell you that AJC has a separate accounting.
Yeah.
We don't. We have to rely on others.
Of course.
But it's somewhere in that range. And number two, the administration makes the point that most of that money, whether it's 55 or 150, is not in American institutions. It's in European and Asian and other banking institutions. So the administration asserts that we don't have any direct control over the release of the money. But again, I come back to the point I made a moment ago. But America does, directly and indirectly, have an enormous toolkit that it can use with other nations, friendly nations, and even not-so-friendly nations, to make clear, if we're not prepared to see Iran get a boost, we have ways of preventing it. If we look the other way or want to prove that we were right and the opponents of this deal were wrong, we may all pay a price.
Okay. One more issue here. There are those who argue the deal is terrible, but that the Jewish community should not use its capital on a losing fight. And one of the persons who's been most eloquent in this discussion is Eric Yaffe, who opposes the deal, but says strategically it makes no sense to take the position in the Jewish community that we're going to lobby Congress to block the deal, when, from Eric's point of view, there is virtually no chance of getting the two-thirds that would be necessary in both houses. The way this deal is being set up, it goes to both houses rather than just the Senate as a treaty, that both houses would have to have a two-thirds majority to override any presidential veto. And that therefore, strategically, someone like Eric argues, David, that it is not in the Jewish community's self-interest, it's counterproductive to have a fight you're going to lose. I'm asking you two questions about this. Number one, do you think it's a foregone conclusion that we would lose? And what do you say to Eric, who argues, if we're going to lose, better not have that fight?
I've heard the argument, and not just from Eric, and we've considered the argument. But at the end of the day, Mark, you know, like you, I've been in this business for a very long time. and lots of policy issues have come up, and sometimes they're really issues of principle, and sometimes they're more pragmatic questions. This one's an issue of principle. This one is a really consequential issue. So our first consideration at AJC was not, are we going to be on the losing side or the winning side? Because we believe that this was a defining issue for ourselves. How would our membership see us? How would the world see us? How would historians years from now look back and see us? And the first consideration was, therefore, on principle and principle alone, we felt we had to speak. We hope we win, but if we lose, we believe, won on principle. That's the first point. And the second point is I would redefine winning and losing a bit here, Mark. Look, the President of the United States is a very powerful person, and when he's really behind an issue, and he's clearly behind this issue, it's a signature issue. So we're not naive about what we're up against. We understand it. But even if at the end of the day the President denies the override of the veto, the very fact that clear majorities of both the House and the Senate, including Democrats just in the last 24 hours, Democrats like Nita Lowey, Steve Israel, Ted Deutsch have joined other Democrats in opposing the deal, the world will know and history will show that a clear majority of both houses of Congress oppose the deal, and history will show that a majority of Americans, at least according to current polls, oppose the deal. And that will also be a message to future presidents and future Congresses. So the president may or may not win on the veto and the override. I don't know yet today, Mark, what will happen on September 17th or thereabouts. But again, one, I wouldn't define victory and defeat so narrowly. Two, principle has to trump pragmatism at times. And three, even if we arguably lose on the issue of the presidential override, my guess is that Congress will be very, very open to considering other ways of looking at the Iran issue, other pieces of legislation to make it clear that we're not going to accept Iranian behavior in the region as has been. So the battle won't be over, whatever the vote is.
David, just fabulous, just fabulous. The AJC and you in particular have taken a very courageous stand. You will really help this issue. You'll move the issue forward. I am so pleased that I had a chance to give you this time on JBS. You know I love you very much, and I have the highest regard for you. But what you've done here, in my mind, takes another step for you and for AJC. So kol hakavod for you. And again, I'll continue to look to you for counsel and wisdom. And all the best to you, David. And wish your mother a very happy birthday from all of us here at JBS.
Thank you, Mark. And to your viewers, AJC Global is the way to follow us on Facebook and Twitter, including on this Iran issue, which we've just been discussing.
Thank you very, very much, David.
Bye-bye, Mark.
You be well. David Harris, Executive Director of the AJC. Again, it is very significant that the American Jewish Committee has taken this very strong stand. And, it continues to galvanize the Jewish world. We have to express our enormous concern to our legislators over this issue. And David is right. It's a matter of principle. Win or lose, we have to do this. As always, my thanks to Sloan Copeland, our director, Serge Goldberg, our production coordinator, associate director of JBS, Dara Golub, and to the producer of this edition of In the News, Carol Lilienthal. Until the next time, I'm Mark Golub. Be well, my friends.